this perception that you're the savior of Michigan football?
I'm not comfortable with that at all. As I said, I'm standing on a foundation that has been built for over 100 years by some great men.
The 2014 presser, Jim's introduction, was, to Michigan fans, it was manna from heaven. The feeling in the room, even amongst the press, it seemed like, was salvation.
Lombardi, he has Hayward. Dives, touchdown, Michigan State.
How would you assess the job you've done 6 years later?
Well, as I said, at the time, I don't, part of a team, didn't consider myself to be a savior then or now.
It's angst, anguish, because the feeling amongst the fan base is, if Jim Harbaugh can't do it, then who can? But if I had to guess, I think you're up to about half the Michigan fan base is seriously contemplating a change.
Embarrassing. That was an embarrassment. Play calling was trash today. Absolute trash.
Harbaugh supporters point to his 48-19 record, 3 10-win seasons, and much improved recruiting rankings. Critics recite these numbers: 0 Big Ten championships, 0 wins in his last 4 bowl games, and 0 wins against Ohio State.
My view of the first down was it was that short.
Beat the Buckeyes. No more, no less. It's the one thing remaining in his way.
Touchdown, Spartans!
It would also help if Harbaugh quit losing to Michigan State at the Big House. Last Saturday, the Wolverines were 3-touchdown favorites and lost, dropping Harbaugh's record to 1-3 against the Spartans at home.
Man, it feels unreal.
That loss, that's red letter, man. This is by far the biggest loss on Harbaugh's resume at Michigan.
As usual, Harbaugh is taking the heat. Do you think it's fair?
I don't know. No comment on that.
Love coaching this team, current team, and the past teams we've had. What happened on Saturday, that window's now closed.
When you put the numbers to it, look, if anybody tells you Michigan's not good, they're just flat wrong. Michigan's good. The problem is they haven't been elite. The record against top 10 opponents. The one that really stands out to me is the record as an underdog at Michigan. He's 0-10. I mean, this guy beat a vaunted USC team as a 40-point dog under Stanford. So it's not as if he's never done it. He just hasn't done it at Michigan. That was an embarrassing loss to Michigan State last week. Spartans were coming off a terrible performance against Rutgers, and it really crystallized for me some of the questions about this. And it comes down to this. The problem at Michigan is either scheme and philosophy or its personality and demeanor and the proverbial culture. So, Desmond, as you look at Michigan right now, what is it in your judgment that's keeping them from elevating from good to really good or great?
Well, RD, first, I think that Gene did a wonderful piece, and I think that the numbers that you've presented, they speak for themselves. And to completely unpack everything that's involved, this will require just me to do this segment. Herbie and Pollack will have to sit out. But since that's not going to happen, just let me tell you what the practical issue is for me. I think that you hit on a couple of things, but on the surface, he hasn't been able to find a quarterback, and for whatever reason, that's another conversation. But he hasn't been able to find a quarterback. After the Minnesota game, people looked at Joe Milton as maybe being the guy, but then the Michigan State game happened. Joe didn't play terrible, but they lost the game. And then number 2, RD, is the fact that I believe that Don Brown, the defensive coordinator, is consistently trying to run a scheme that he does not have the personnel for, and that's being exposed. Now, normally, it's exposed kind of later in the season with, playing against maybe Ohio State, a team like that with really great receivers and a very talented quarterback. But last week, it was exposed early by Michigan State, and then there were none or few changes in the secondary. So, like I say, there's a lot to unpack there, RD, but that's just the beginning for me, David.
Yeah, and to answer your question, listen, I think it's personality. And when I say that,
Jim Harbaugh's not getting it done like we thought he would, like he's getting paid. Like, I'll be honest, I remember where I was when he got hired. We were at the Rose Bowl, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is huge news for Michigan. This is going to put them in the elite category. I think just judging it from the outside in, I'm not in the locker room every single day. I think it's personality. I think there's something about relating to kids. Maybe as he's gotten a little bit older and the game has changed and the clientele has changed. There's no doubt about it. Jim Harbaugh's old school. He's an old school guy. Like, he's a different bird. I think relating to the kids has been, it appears to be a little bit of a struggle, and they're underperforming. He is the fourth highest paid coach in college football. Like, obviously, if I'm a Michigan fan, I want better results. It's Jim Harbaugh, so I expect better things than that. And, Coach, what do you think?
Jim Harbaugh's record now at home is against his rivals, Michigan State and Ohio State, is 1-6. His record against Ohio State is 0-5. He has not won a bowl game in his last 4 tries. And add to that, Michigan has won 24 straight against Indiana. Needless to say, Kirk, this is a must game for the Big Blue. A must game for the Big Blue.
No doubt. I mean, they've been backed into a corner after a loss last week to a rival. To me, the reality is the game has never been more about being able to play in space and defend in space. And in order to do that, you need elite personnel at the skill spots. And if you look at Michigan at wide receiver and at corner, over the years that Jim Harbaugh has been there, they've been good, as Reese said, but they haven't been elite. So when they get on the field with a team like an Ohio State or an Alabama, they get exposed in those areas because Don Brown, going back to what Des said, he lives out on an edge. He asks his corners to play one-on-one. Last week they got exposed. As far as the personality, I think, I've been close to this program just calling games on Saturday night. I think he still relates very well to the players. But at some point, the players need to take accountability. At some point, it's not just Jim Harbaugh. When I watched the Michigan State-Michigan game, we can break down XOs all we want. That team looked deflated. Michigan State looked like, after a loss to Rutgers, they were playing with an edge. They were looking like desperate. Michigan was just kind of cruising. How do you play your rival? And I know it's COVID and we have empty stadiums and all that, but how do you play your rival and just kind of go through the motions? So who are the leaders on this team that are allowing that to go on? So I think the players need to take some responsibility, not just put it all on Jim Harbaugh.
That's true. They're a little bit younger, though, real quick.
Well, you talk about its receivers and the game is like it's also your job as a coach to find those guys.
Yeah, for sure.
You got to go get those guys.
Yeah.
You got to recruit them.
And here's the other thing. The administration has not changed, as I told you a couple of weeks ago. They don't want anything. They don't want Harbaugh to go anywhere, Des, except to work at Schembechler Hall.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. I think the point that David made, I thought the same thing, David. I said maybe he's not, relating to these players, but don't forget, these are his recruits. So these guys are committing to come to Ann Arbor to play for Jim Harbaugh if they can't relate to this guy. So he's bringing in some guys who, Michigan isn't the only team that's recruiting them. So I used to think that, but then I said, well, you know what? If they relate to him well enough that they're going to commit to go to the University of Michigan, then I don't think that's the problem. It's not that he can't relate to the players. They must like him enough that they commit to Michigan.
I bet they play with their hair on fire in Bloomington.
If they don't.
Well, if they don't, then we'll have this discussion again next week, and it'll be far more serious.
Players.
You will not have to worry even 1 second about people arriving energized and excited.